Looks like we have a quorum of both.
All right, well, I'm not doing the official welcome, but Lawrence Harris with the Clark County School District. We are starting the collaborative between the Clark County School District Board of Education and the Athens-Clarke County Unified Governments Commission. We will be meeting tonight to discuss youth engagement and development opportunities in the Athens-Clarke County community. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass the torch to Dr. Thomas, Superintendent of Clark County School District, to give a brief welcome, and then to Mayor Gertz to also give a welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So on behalf of the Clark County School District, I thank each of you for your time this evening and welcome you to our collaborative work session together. Our tagline this year has been Better Together, and I truly believe that in many aspects of our work and us working side by side with our commissioners to address the issues plaguing our community is one significant step forward in this process, and looking at services and supports and programming for our youth is near and dear to my heart as well as to the heart of us as a school district, and I know to the Athens-Clarke County Unified Government as well. I've had conversations with Mayor Gertz and with some of our commissioners, and so we just look forward to this time together, with today being focused on just clearly identifying what the needs are and the what is the situation at hand, and then looking forward to future, very near future time together to move toward identifying next steps and solutions. So we just hope that tonight will be an opportunity for all of us to share collectively from our own perspectives and the perspectives of those you represent, to ensure that as a community we are working toward programming to meet the needs of young people in Athens.
Thank you. And Mayor Gertz, on to you.
Thanks, Lawrence. I appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you here, and Happy New Year. Still January here for a few more days. Want to thank you for your ongoing partnership. I think it's the case in any community that no one institution can do all the work alone, and absolutely everything that you have provided collectively as a body and individually when you've called or texted or emailed with ideas or thoughts or suggestions are really valuable to us in Athens-Clarke County Unified Government. Just in the last year, I've had conversations with some of you, not just in the realm of youth development and workforce development, but around open space and trails and the opportunity to expand our ability to work minority contractors into our rubric of contracted agents. And so I'm really glad for our conversation tonight. So many important organizations like both of us and others, have our feet in that space of youth development in after school time, on weekends and summers. And I think we'll create a community that's more accessible to everybody through the conversation we have tonight. So I'm really grateful for this and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. So tonight's agenda is on the screen before you, but Ms. Tillman also emailed it out, and we can drop a link in the chat box for those who may not have a copy. I'm just going to give you all a brief overview of what the evening will look like. You are in store for some amazing presentations. There are several presentations, so prepare yourself, get yourself comfortable, maybe a bag of popcorn and your notepad for the notes. We're going to have a presentation from Mr. Kent Kilpatrick first, who is the Director of Leisure Services with the Athens-Clarke County Unified Government. Then we'll move on to Dr. Shannon Brooks, who is the Director of the Office of Service Learning at the University of Georgia. And then Ms. Hope McGuire, who's our Director of Academic Support, and Dr. Angela Pope, who's with our 21st Century program at the Clark County School District, will present to talk about after school programming for youth and summer programming. And then we will round out the presentations with a brief presentation by Dr. Grace Bagwell Adams, who will talk about the Athens Wellbeing Project and some of the data that they've collected and their findings around opportunities in childcare here in Athens. And at the end of the agenda, Dr. Jennifer Scott, who's our Executive Director of Leadership Development with CCSD, will lead board members and commissioners through a situation analysis that will really help to show where are some of the gaps we see and youth development opportunities here in Athens. So tonight we may not jump straight into solutions, but it's about figuring out where the context is of where we are here in Athens, with hopes that we will be able to resolve some issues in the future. So without further ado, and to keep us on track, I will toss it to Mr. Kilpatrick for his presentation.
All right, Lawrence, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here this evening. Like its screen says, my name is Kent Kilpatrick. I'm pleased to be the director of the Athens-Clarke County Leisure Services Department. This presentation has been a wonderful exercise for me. I've been here a little over 33 years with the Athens-Clarke County Leisure Services Department, actually prior to unification. And I've gotten to watch how this partnership has grown successfully over the years. And also all the many ways that we jointly serve the youth in this community. But to see it all put on paper in one place at one time, I must admit was pretty exciting for me because I was here when it first started. So this has been a great exercise for me, and I appreciate that opportunity. Let me say too, before we get started, I want to thank Angela Tillman. She's agreed to kind of drive this presentation for me because I'm less familiar with Zoom than I am WebEx. Also, you're getting ready to see a significant number of programs and numbers of kids perhaps that are involved in some of these programs. Please understand that these are all pre-pandemic numbers. It's a typical year leading up to the pandemic. We all know that during the past 11 months, many things have been impacting our lives, and leisure services programs and services and ability to reach everybody is no different. We've been doing a great job virtually, the best we can, but obviously it doesn't reach the same number that we're used to reaching. Okay, Angela. So I've tried to divide this up into segments that I hope will be easy for each of you to follow. And to start off with, let's talk about the ways we partner when school is actually in session. During the school day, what are we doing together? Well, two things that we've been doing successfully, and probably two of our longest standing agreements or partnerships together. One has been an annual contract between the Sandy Creek Nature Center and the school district to provide that science-based learning for every kindergarten through fifth grader. So our Nature Center staff touches every one of those elementary age kids, either in the classroom by bringing materials there, or on site when some of them come out in certain grades to do their field studies at the Sandy Creek Nature Center. Also, we are very pleased to be putting together every month a newsletter called Leisure Pursuits. It's bilingual, and it's distributed to every child at the first of each month. So parents are aware of the things that we have going on that their children can be participating throughout the month. Okay, next. Oops. So that was two ways we work together during the school day, but perhaps what most of you may be familiar with is some of our after-school activities. We have what many people are aware of, our three popular after-school programs at our community centers at East Athens, Lay Park, and Rock Springs. And we've had a very successful partnership with UGA student mentors who provide either one-on-one or very small group mentoring for these students before they can become engaged in some recreational activities. They work through their homeworks or do some reading. Another new partnership that just started in the fall of 2019 and obviously was cut off when the pandemic arrived and schools were forced to close. But we helped Gaines School Elementary revive their after-school program by bringing our staff in 2 days a week and very successfully providing a variety of after-school activities. It may have been in the arts, it may a little bit in the sciences, it was a lot of games, there's a lot of exercising. So that was a very successful partnership, and you can see the numbers that grew for Gaines after-school program. We're looking forward to reviving that. Hopefully no later than the fall. Also, two things that people don't often think about, but our gymnastics and dance programs serve a lot of youth in this community in late afternoons and early evenings. And you can see those numbers. Dr. Brooks is going to talk a little bit about the new Grow It to Know It program, which is taking on extreme popularity and may be growing soon based on the numbers of kids who are responding to that program at East Athens Community Center. Okay, next. So beyond the school day itself and after school activities, there's those times of year when there's a day off school, whether it's a teacher learning day or there's perhaps school breaks. And what we try to do and have been building this program after the past several years is to provide programs during those times because we understand that parents still need us. If they cannot send their child to school, they still have to work. What can Leisure Services do to step up? And you can see on an average year now, we're up to 17 day off school programs. And it gives you some examples of some of the types that we do. And we also provide 9 different camps during the breaks. And these generally are those Thanksgiving, Christmas, and spring break camps. Those continue to grow in popularity as they fill to capacity. That's what's led us to be adding more. So we're hopefully going to be able to continue to shift in the future to meet those demands as they grow. Okay, next. So of course you can't talk about camps without talking about the summertime. So when school's out for the summer, our largest service that we provide this to the community will be in the form of summer camps. You can see the variety of ways that we provide them through athletics, the arts, through nature, through recreation. And we do touch 5,600 youth registering each summer. Now that's not necessarily 5,600 different children. Some of them may register for more than one camp, but that's 5,600 registrations during the course of the summer. One thing I'm very excited about is a few years back, I challenged staff to start trying to create more teen camp opportunities. And you can see we've now grown to where in the summer of 2019, we had 12 different teen camps, which reached 390 teens ages 13 through 16. And a new summer program that just started in 2018 was KinderSwim. And what I'm excited about this program is that swimming is a challenge for so many families. And therefore, if it's a challenge for the family, it's a challenge for the child. And we started a program where every 5-year-old in this county can receive free swim lessons. It's a series of 9 lessons. So it's not just lip service to swimming, but you come back over the course of 3 weeks for 9 different lessons. And the summer of 2019, we taught 200 5-year-olds to swim. Word is really spreading about this. There was a lot of interest prior to the pandemic shutting us down for the summer, but we're excited about reviving that again this coming year. So we talk about teens, and this is a real challenging market for us when it comes to recreation services. We are always looking for ways that we can program and provide services for this age group. Many of you, if you've been in Athens for several years, may recall during the 90s and early 2000s, there was a very popular program called Grand Slam that used to bring middle and high school students to Bishop Park on Friday and Saturday nights. Well, unfortunately, budget reductions during the recession led to the loss of that program financially, but our mayor and commission voted to bring it back a couple of years ago. We've partnered with the staff at Cedar Shoals High School. We're very thrilled with that partnership, and it worked very successfully during the summer of 2019, where we had 338 middle and high school students coming out on Friday nights for a wide variety of games and enrichment activities and guest speakers. A lot of UGA athletes volunteered to come out and talk about their experience and the importance of being in school, and then stick around and engage in some games and activities with the young people. So it is our hope to be able to bring that back again this summer. Also, a new thing we started this past year was the Mayor's Youth Commission. And we have 38 students from our local high schools who actually engaged and helped write the bylaws to create our first Mayor's Youth Commission. They spent a lot of time learning about how Athens-Clarke County government works, and then writing those bylaws with the goal of being able to get teens engaged and involved in their local government. And we've already begun using them as a resource. How can we reach teens in this community, and how can we better serve them? And even virtually, some of those meetings have continued, and we're excited as bringing on the next phase of this group for the coming school year. We do provide some counselor and training programs. As you can see, we only have 18 teens now because it's volunteer opportunities only. We're working on a proposal with the Mayor Commission to hopefully begin paying young people and growing this counselor and training program so it can be a pipeline to some summer employment while they are in high school and perhaps even beyond. But along the way, they can learn some very valuable job skills and life enrichment skills throughout. And then we have grown teen programming through our arts and our sciences. So we're very excited about those opportunities as well. And we're continuing to research and try to grow this market. Okay, next. Another segment that really started coming on strong within the past 3 years is our staff at a couple of facilities, and Bear Hollow Zoo being one of them, began dabbling in some toddler programs, some mommy and me programs is what they were called, to where mom could come out with their toddler, their pre-K child, and engage in certain activities. Well, that just mushroomed. Suddenly we were filling every program we tried to offer with long waiting lists. So over the past few years, we've now reached to the point where we're doing 60 different programs this age group, and you can see that we're currently serving in a variety of ways. A few examples of some of the types of programs that we're serving them with. These are still filling up. They're still very popular. So we're also trying to engage that market more as we go, and getting a lot of great feedback from parents and participants. Next. So let's talk a moment about the ways that we have agreements and partnerships. If you've been involved with either agency for a while, you're probably familiar with the fact that we have a written agreement for shared use of our facilities. And this has been a wonderful partnership that's been extremely successful. This allows both agencies to use each other's facilities as long as they're available at no charge. The only pass along is if there's any staff overtime associated. Grand Slam at Cedar Shoals High School, we need to be paying for because they would not be there ordinarily if were it not for the program. So you can see the number of requests and the students that we serve on field trips coming out to our parks. Most of that's all throughout the school year, obviously. And then both high schools use our tennis courts at the new tennis center and at Bishop Park for their practices and their matches. In turn, we have been working very successfully with Jim Gurley over at Transportation Office to contract with bus services for all of our summer camps. And that has been a real key to us being successful throughout the summer. I've also mentioned that partnership with the high school and Grand Slam. We also are able to whenever we're trying to reach schools for or reach parents for public meetings, we'll often borrow space within the schools to have those meetings because parents are very comfortable sometimes in coming to schools for that purpose. So these have been great partnerships. That shared use facility continues to be a wonderful way for us to be working together. Next. A couple of other ways that we have worked successfully together in partnerships. One is our Linden House Arts Center staff has worked with all the school district art teachers on artwork that leads up to an annual show that's displayed in the galleries at the Linden House. Now, if you've not been to this show before, I really encourage you to come check out the next time that this is able to take place, because there's nothing like seeing the expression on the face of a child when they walk in with a parent to a gallery the size of the Linden House and see their own artwork on the wall displayed. Their excitement is just contagious. And over 400 students wind up being part of this show that consumes every gallery in the Linden House. And it has been a wonderful partnership with our staff and the school district art teachers. Also, leading up to every school year, our Nature Center staff does some science and nature-based learning with those school district teachers that are interested, and we generally get an average of 15 that take part in our Wet and Wild training program each year. Okay, next. Another way that we work together collaboratively is through some outreach opportunities. We have staff that actually goes out to open houses and school science nights and family nights. We get invitations from some schools we do not, but let me encourage you, we always welcome those. Kathy Paget, many of you know, is a wonderful resource for us, and she grew up in this school district, and she loves to go out and talk with parents and promote the services. It's a great chance for us to promote what we do. And it also allows us to promote the scholarship program that's mentioned on here. We work with family engagement specialists in the district to connect parents with scholarship opportunities for their children. At present, we have approximately 1,100 students registered in our scholarship program, but we're always seeking ways to connect more parents to that. And many of you, if you've been in Athens any time at all, you're familiar with the town parade of lights that takes place at the holidays each year. Unfortunately, we had to cancel it this past December, but the last time we held it in 2019, we had a record high 12 school district groups participate between marching bands, step teams, and ROTC. And that has been, again, another wonderful partnership that's made our local parade so successful. Okay, next. So let's talk a second about opportunities and challenges as we see it in serving this demographic. We mentioned the teenage group earlier. We're always looking at trying to grow and serve the teens in this community. They really, what they're telling us, and we heard this from the Mayor's Youth Commission as well as the teens that are in our programs, they would like to have a place to call their own, you know, somewhere that they can gather. Right now, when they go to the community centers, they're engaging a lot either with their younger siblings or other younger siblings in the community because those sites are so popular for 5 to 12-year-olds, but they want space that they can call their own. And we're working on a couple of ideas of how we can possibly make that work. Also, that toddler and pre-K demographic continues to grow. Those mini programs that I mentioned earlier, those 60 programs, all are filling to capacity. So we know that that's an age group, a market that we want to continue to try to reach. Also, the Mayor and Commission has identified a goal of trying to do some job skill development for our local youth. And we're very interested, and we think we can play an important role in that. Back in the mid-2000s, I partnered with the school district and we did a junior youth apprenticeship program for about 5 straight years that was very popular, and it taught some of those life enrichment skills and job training opportunities, and students gave up their spring break to go through training, and then they actually went through interviews at the end of that training and then were selected for some opportunities to do some shadowing and some engagement in our programs and camps in the summer. So we're talking about ways where we can bring back some of those life skill development for teenagers. Next. And then a few other challenges we see coming up. A challenge we've always had is reaching some of those underserved communities. How can we get to them? I mentioned sometimes having meetings in schools, but also meetings in our own facilities that are adjacent to some of these communities have been helpful, but we're looking for new ways to connect with those families. And in part, that will help us meet that next challenges, which is those scholarship services. 1,100 youth taking advantage of scholarships is a great service to provide, but compared to the number of potential eligible kids that could be taking, I still think we've got work to do. So we want to continue to make those connections where we can so people can take advantage and not feel like any price or dollar amount is preventing their child from receiving the same service that any other child could receive. And then lastly, one challenge we know we all have as we transition back to our normal or new normal operations is what that transition looks like. And we know that as we go forward, we're always talking about new safety protocols for all of our services, including starting with Safe Summer Camp this coming summer. How do we provide our aquatic services more safely than we ever were before? So we're putting plans in place and having conversations about what in-person programming is going to look like again. And also, how do we continue to mix in that option of virtual opportunities that have become so successful and a lot of people have stepped up and responded to. So that's my presentation. I certainly welcome any questions that anyone may have.
I have just a quick little idea. Ken, you guys had a drive-in movie, holiday movie, which apparently was a big success because it sold out pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if, there's any thoughts about doing some outdoor films for teens, especially once the weather gets warmer and school's out. That seems like something that would be a good transitional activity, while the pandemic is still affecting us.
Commissioner Link, I agree with you. And we've been talking about putting together our movie schedule for the year. We want to get it out soon for the entire calendar year. And we've talked about a variety of ways that we could use that movie screen to perhaps reach that group. We are showing next month on February 12th, Black Panther. Ooh. So we're certainly hoping that that will help begin to reach that market, but we're looking at other opportunities down the road as well.
Are you doing it at Sandy Creek again?
We're going to do it at Sandy Creek Park. Once we can get to the point where we no longer have to rely on being in vehicles and we can put people on grounds and sit on blankets and in chairs, then we're able to go to other places. It opens up the doors to East Athens Community Center and Rock Springs and other places where currently vehicles cannot fit on those fields.
Okay, looking forward to that.
Good.
I'm real interested in this idea of teen space, and I'm just wondering. And again, I know we're not really necessarily coming up with solutions, but I'm just wondering if obviously we have our schools, we have our high schools, we have spaces in our high schools. Is there a mechanism that in what you've given already in terms of co-financing? I know that you talk about renting school buses in the summertime, and certainly offering programs for teachers and for students and young people. But I would love to see something like that happen, like every Friday night, some type of dance with a DJ and supervision and that type of thing. And of course we have gymnasiums and all kinds of spaces for something like that, but it would be costly. And I'm trying to think in terms of, I don't know what, and Dr. Thomas, you may be able to speak to this. I don't know what limitations we have in terms of financing, in terms of both legally and budget-wise. But if there was a partnership, in all their examples of where monies are commingled, so to speak.
I think, and actually I was sitting here taking a lot of notes, and I'm really excited about a lot of what Mr. Kilpatrick offered or shared with us today. I still feel like we need to wait before we get to that point, to hear all of the presentations and then to start looking as a group about where we want to try to go. And then we can examine what are our options out there, what facilities do we have, what funding do we have. And once we identify clearly our next steps, then we can match potential funding and other resources to what we come up with as a plan.
And Mr. Davis, I will say as well that when you talked about having a DJ and dance, you partially described what takes place at Grand Slam every Friday night in the summer. Our Mayor Commission has very generously given a budget to the Grand Slam program that's allowed us to get more creative in the ways that we can pull teens into that program. So that is a piece of it, and a very popular piece of it, as a matter of fact. They love once the DJ hits that floor, and he even teaches them about music and how to mix music and work with music. So we've tried to make it an educational component as well. But yes, we are looking for ways that perhaps we can transition some of our current space to continue serving not just in the summer, but beyond that market.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kilpatrick and Mr. Davis, I'm looking at the comments that Ms. McGuire wrote in and talking about expanding those options. So I really believe, like, once we know exactly, then we can, because different funding sources and options, are tailored for different activities. And so once we can be more specific about what it is we want to do, then we can make sure that we're using the most appropriate funds. And in terms of facilities, of course, we can definitely make that work, because one, we have a partnership, but bigger than that, we're serving all of our children. So I agree with you. I mean, it's exciting, and I'm just sitting here trying to think, okay, what do we have? What can we use? How can we make sure we're complying with usage of funds? So wanting to be sure that we get a strong plan so then we can present that plan and tailor the money to meet that plan.
Mr. Kilpatrick, I just want to commend you. I've been able to participate in some of the Toddler programs, and my boys visited Grand Slam, and I've heard nothing but positive feedback, and being able to get feedback and just know what other counties are doing. I think that we're leaps and bounds ahead, and we're really providing a really good service to our families. So thank you for the programs that you've offered, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone on helping us to build those programs out.
Thank you, Nicole.
Well, that seems like a great transition to Dr. Brooks from the University of Georgia. I think, to what Dr. Thomas was saying, we have some really great presentations tonight. So as presenters have about 15 minutes of presentations and 10 minutes for questions. And I know there'll be a lot more questions at the end as well. So please take your notes, but we will get Dr. Brooks going. And then after her, we'll cue you up, Ms. McGuire and Dr. Pope. You're following Dr. Brooks.
Well, good evening. I'm very happy to be here tonight. I want to thank you for the invitation to present. We're always really excited to get an opportunity to talk about what we're doing in the Office of Service Learning, and especially with a meeting like this that is really focused on future collaborations and partnerships, because it's pretty much the basis of what we do in our office. We have no programs without partnerships, and so I'm very pleased to be here. For those of you who are not familiar with the Office of Service Learning, you may be familiar with some of our programs, and I have some logos up here. Our Experience UGA program, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later tonight, Grow It, Know It, which will be pretty much the focus of most of my presentation. We also have a UGA AmeriCorps Vista network, and we have Vistas placed for a year of service all over the community. Give Pulse, or Engage Georgia, as we call it on campus. If you signed up for the MLK Day of Service or Rivers Alive, you have used Give Pulse, and you probably know Josh Podvin, who's our Assistant Director for Community Partnerships, because he's always out talking about Give Pulse. And then our Campus Kitchen program, which actually focuses on senior hunger issues and is a food waste and hunger program that's run by our students. And so we have many of these partnerships and programs, but we also work with faculty all over campus and all of our schools and colleges to support the development of service learning courses. And that actually connects nearly 10,000 UGA students a year to community needs and hands-on projects through their coursework at UGA. And they do this not just in our local community, but all over the state and actually in some international communities. You can go to the next slide. As I said, tonight I want to talk a little bit about Grow It, Know It, and Kent mentioned our new partnership with Leisure Services, which we're really excited about. This has been wonderful, I think, for our staff and for some of our student volunteers. But many of you may be familiar with Grow It, Know It. Just a little bit of background. Grow It, Know It is actually a farm to school program. We've partnered with Clark County Schools since 2014. It actually started at Clark Middle School. If you've been to Clark Middle School, you know they have a really impressive garden, and that is due in part to the work of our Grow It, Know It AmeriCorps Vistas and our coordinator, but as well as just, I think, the vision of the teachers and support at Clark Middle School. That program has actually grown to all 4 middle schools in Clark County, and we've had a long partnership since 2014. And the model that we use is that we place an AmeriCorps Vista at every school, and they help to coordinate all of these different areas of work. And we work in about 5 different areas, everything from our very popular kitchen garden core summer program. Some of you have probably attended pop-up lunches as part of that program. We also do a focus on school cafeteria waste to divert some waste to composting, as well as reuse of things like fruits in the family and consumer sciences classrooms. We do school produce markets. There's a community benefit dinner to benefit nonprofits that actually support CCSD students. And then also a big part of the Grow It, Know It program is to help maintain and develop the school gardens. Any of you who've ever participated in any type of community gardening or school gardening know that maintenance and sustaining it is really the hard part. And so fortunately, our vistas are there year round, even when school is not in session, to help to do that. And then also to help teachers make connections into the classroom. You can go to the next slide. These are our partners. We have partners obviously in ACC, Clark County School District, and now with Leisure Services. And we also have a new partnership that started at the start of the pandemic with Covenant Presbyterian. Many of you know they have some very active food distribution and food justice initiatives. And they've been an amazing partner for our Grow It, Know It program. We cook there every week to provide meals to the families that are being served out of East Athens. And then now this spring, we'll be going to Lay Park as well. We also are in Barrow County, and I mention this because this particular partnership was actually funded by a USDA grant, which is about to run out. But one of the great things that came out of that USDA grant was a teacher training program to train teachers who are very interested in incorporating school garden and environmental education concepts into their classroom. And while the grant was focused on Barrow County, we've been able to include Clark County teachers in those programs for the last few years. We are starting to think about this summer already, and we hope we will be able to offer some in-person trainings. Obviously, we were not able to last summer, but we will have to obviously see how the pandemic develops. Next slide. So since the pandemic, we have been working closely, obviously, with in-person, with a pivot to virtual instruction. In-person engagement at the schools has obviously not been possible. And so Grow It, Know It really had to rethink what was going to happen. And so we've started to move into after-school programming, as well as getting more deeply involved in the food production and distribution side of things with everything that's going on in Clark County. So one of the things that our Grow It, Know It AmeriCorps members, as well as our staff coordinator, have done is to actually help maintain the Clark Middle and Hillsman gardens. throughout the pandemic. And there have actually been thousands of pounds of produce that has been harvested over the last year that has then been diverted into food distribution efforts. Early on, it went to support CCSD efforts. I know many of you are familiar with the work Manny Stone was doing to support restaurant workers and other families, and a lot of that produce went into those meals. And now it is actually going to nonprofits that are supporting families in the community. And there's many, many other elements that have happened, but I will just highlight that. Next slide, please. I mentioned our Kitchen Garden Core Summer Program, and this is such a wonderful program for middle school students, and they get to work in the garden, learn about culinary skills, and then at the end of the week, they do a weekly pop-up lunch. You can see a slide here. It was always very well attended because it's a 3-course amazing meal. Obviously with the pandemic, we were unable to do this program in person, so we have pivoted that to a virtual program. It was still, I think, very successful, but it has made us start to think, what are we planning to do this summer? Is there ways that we could do some hybrid programming? And I think from some of the things that we have learned working at East Athens, that we hope that we will be able to offer at least some measure of in-person programming. Next slide. So Kent mentioned our new partnership with ACC Leisure Services, and virtual engagement is obviously very important, and we've been trying to maintain that with all of our programs, especially with our youth programs. But you can't beat some of these face-to-face offerings, and particularly given where we know that there's a real gap and a need in our community for after-school programming. This fall, we decided that an ideal way to meet that need would be to actually consider some outdoor programming with our Grow It, Know It program. And since it is based around garden space and outdoor space, it makes a lot of sense to be able to do that in a safer manner. And we felt pretty strongly about that with our staff. We want them to obviously also be in a safe environment. So East Athens has a really wonderful garden space. You can see a picture of it right here. It's a really ideal location. They're very embedded in the community. So we felt like there were great relationships with families in the area, so that it wouldn't be too hard to convince families and children to engage with our programming. And so in the fall, we started offering a 2-day-a-week program on Mondays and Thursdays at East Athens Community Center. This spring, and actually starting next week, we will be offering this also 2 days a week at Lay Park. And the Lay Park does not have this type of space, but we will actually, starting next week, be building raised beds, and the kids will actually get an opportunity to help do that. So it's going to be really, I think, a fun project for them. But they do everything from planting, managing, harvesting. They learn how to cook basic recipes, and we've had anywhere between 15 to 30 children who've participated each week. One of the other things that we're also doing is actually providing a hot meal for families to take home, and that's cooked at Covenant every week and then provided to those families. I think a big part of the Grow It, Know It program is forming relationships, and food is a really great way to do that. And so we want not only to have an opportunity to offer this programming, but to form longer term relationships with these families that we're serving. Our UGA students provide volunteer support for the after school program. And one of the ideal things about working with Leisure Services has been that we can plug into their registration system, their facility offerings, and then also the background check requirements and process that they have in place. And it's just very seamless for us, and allows us to focus on the programming, which is what we really want to do. So this spring, we have some really neat partnerships that are happening with our UGA students. In the fall, there's a student organization called the Whatever It Takes Student Organization, and they have been very committed to working at East Athens, and they helped work with Grow It, Know It as well. We will also be working with the Lunchbox program, which is an after-school program that has been active in Clark County for a long time. We also have a really interesting service learning course being taught on the therapeutic play, and that those students will be also volunteering with Grow It, Know It at both locations. And then interestingly, another program, another service learning course that's brand new, it's called Philosophy and Children. And that we have 19 students who will also be spending their time, not only with Grow It, Know It, but also with an AmeriCorps Vista that we have at the ACC library in the Teen Services Division. And so we're really excited about all of the interaction that I think we're going to have. We've also found during the pandemic that you have to have backup volunteers for your backups. And so it's really important that we have enough volunteers to adequately staff the after-school program. You can go ahead to the next slide. I also wanted to give you a brief update on some of our other programming. Experience UGA is a long-term partnership that we've had with the Clark County School District, which actually provides an opportunity. Our goal is to bring every Clark County student, pre-K through 12th grade, to UGA for an academic field trip every single year. It has taken us 8 years to build this program, and I think in our 6th year, we finally reached the point where we were bringing 12,000 students a year at every single grade level. And then of course, last year, we got halfway through the year and we brought about half the students, and we had to obviously suspend the trips. And so if you can go to the next slide. So what we have been working on this fall is to actually create Experience UGA Virtual. And this, I'm happy to say that in December, our website launched, and it's a really exciting, I think, opportunity, and one that we hope to continue even after the pandemic, because we think the content is going to be really helpful for classroom teachers as well as parents. But anyone can go to experienceUGAvirtual.uga.edu, and we are loading trip content throughout the spring from pre-K to 8th grade, and it's based around a Bitmoji classroom, similar to what CCSD teachers are using. We're starting the rollout to teachers with the help of our Experience UGA advisory group, which is made up of CCSD administrators and teachers, as well as UGA staff. And I would invite you to take a look at the content. A lot of it was developed by some of our UGA students who serve as Experience UGA ambassadors. And you can see these little Bitmojis down in the left-hand corner. Those are actually the Bitmojis of our ambassadors, and they share information about themselves and their college journey. And they're just a really amazing group of students that have committed a lot of work to this. Next slide. I mentioned throughout this that we have AmeriCorps Vista network. Our Grow It, Know It program has, the Vistas who are placed at each middle school, but we also have Vistas who are placed at other organizations. The ACC Teen Library Services, the Athens Community Council on Aging, Clark County Mentor Program, and College Factory, just to name a few. And those are the ones that have something to do with some youth services. I want to mention what the ACC Teen Library Services Vista is doing, because it's so interesting, but she has started a new partnership with the UGA Writing Center. And it's an online writing group for teens, and they can write in any genre. They can create podcasts, videos, and then they get support from the Writing Center and feedback. So I think it's just an amazing connection back to UGA, and an example of how those Vistas are doing such great work in our community. Next slide. Okay, and then finally, this is my last bit, but I just wanted to, there's a lot going on in the virtual space and in a lot of our traditional programs that have been around for a long time. I particularly wanted to mention the work that is going on at Oasis at Pinewoods. I know many of you are familiar with this program. And, with Sister Margarita's departure, I know we were all sad to see her leave the community, but they are continuing to do amazing work there. We have worked with them for probably 15 years now. And we do provide 2 undergraduate student workers who actually are placed there and help to administer the volunteer program in typical times. They're even more important, I think, right now because they have undertaken a virtual program. And last semester, we had about 150 UGA students who still participated and provided tutoring services to children in that community, many of whom are students at J.J. Harris. So we're excited to continue to support what they are doing, and I'm sure that they could provide an additional update at some time. We have many, many other things going on. I will just mention Project Focus, which is also a long-term service learning partnership. And this fall, we had about 64 UGA students who participated in virtual classrooms with 17 of our CCSD teachers. That course is taught by Jason Peak, who's in the Department of Ag Leadership, Education, and Communication, but the course is for science majors. And so they learn how to actually develop hands-on interactive science instruction for elementary school students. If you can go to the next slide. Just to let you know who we are, here are some of our staff members, and we are always happy to hear from all of you. And if there are ways that we can be partnering or, one of the, I think, challenges that I think has been exacerbated by the pandemic is that, it's very difficult in a large organization like UGA, even for a university-wide office like ours, we're always finding out new resources and new people doing things and new student programs. And so part of our job is to help make those connections between the university and the community. And sometimes we do a great job with it, and sometimes it's pretty challenging. But if there are needs that you are trying to meet, we will always try to make those introductions or partnerships. That is the end of my presentation. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
Shannon, I had one question.
Yes.
How, in terms of your Grow It, Know It program, how do you get the word out?
Well, we've been really fortunate with Leisure Services has done the lion's share of that work for us. And so I think that's one of the benefits of partnering with an organization that already has such a robust way of connecting. And they also have a lot of children who had been coming to the center already. And so it was really easy to sort of divert them to our programming for the after school programming. So, and then some of it has also just been word of mouth as well. But I will say, I think that's a huge challenge as we think about the after school programming of how to get the word out to families, because it is not an easy task.
Have you found, and this is my last question, but have you found that you still got room to grow? I mean, it's like, for instance, when you talk about the East Athens Community Center, you said 15 to 30. I'm sure it varies. Do you feel like it's that maybe, I mean, could you hold 40? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out if you're maxed out in terms of that program, for instance.
I think our original cap was 60 that we were thinking. So we're not quite, I think we feel like we could accommodate more at this point, but I really think it just depends on, we have to make sure it's staffed appropriately. And the other, I think, wonderful thing about partnering with Leisure Services, they have similar ideas to us about, making sure we have programming that maintains social distancing, mask wearing, safe practices. Even, we think the outdoor spaces are a great place for us to be thinking about this. And I think there's lots of potential in Clark County for additional outdoor spaces that could be utilized if you can find the human resource power to do it. So. Were there any questions in the chat? I'm sorry, did I miss any?
I just got one quick one about are you in the Grow It program? Are you also including composting?
Yeah, it's a very important part of our program. So we do that as part of reducing food waste in the cafeteria. And then it's also a huge part of the gardening aspect of that program. Mm-hmm.
Shannon, this is Carol Meyer speaking.
Hey, Carol.
And I just wanted to mention like one thing I wrote here in the chat, but that the program that you have that has the goal of getting all the kids onto the UGA campus, I just think that's wonderful. During my teaching career at Athens Tech, there would be so few students who would ever step foot on the UGA campus. So I'm really excited that you have that program going on. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a wonderful partnership. It's taken a very long time to build that program, and it's been through many iterations. But so we were, the timing of the pandemic, we were right there where it's like every kid really does have an opportunity. So I see a rebuilding in our future, but it's, we're very committed to it.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Brooks. Hopefully you'll stick around to the end in case there are any other questions come up.
Sure.
Not holding you hostage, but we'd love to keep you.
That's okay.
We will now transition to Ms. Hope McGuire, who's the Director of Academic Support Special Projects in Title I, and Dr. Angela Pope, who's the 21st Century CCLC Program Manager with the Clark County School District.
Thanks, Mr. Harris. Good evening, everyone. I'm Angela Pope, and as Mr. Harris mentioned, I'm the 21st Century Program Manager, and I also oversee the district's after-school program along with my director, Hope McGuire. I know we have a tendency to use the after-school names interchangeably. However, there are some distinct differences. So I'll give a brief overview of what those programs are. And the first one is our after-school program. You're fine, yeah, after-school program, which we commonly refer to as the ASP program. And in this program, they are only available at the 14 elementary schools. They are parent funded. There's no monetary support from the district. The funds remain at the specific school that the child attends. The fee is $6 per day and $4 for each additional child. There's a $10 registration fee, and that fee is capped at $20 per family. Drop-in service is available. There's no family commitment. So if a family decides to have a child to attend the first day of school to never return again, that's totally okay. The program operates from the first day of school through the last day of school, and it's available Monday through Friday from 2:30 until 6 p.m. All program offerings are site-specific, but all sites offer homework help. Next slide, please. On this slide, I present some data from last school year. There's a wide range in the average number of students that each site serves because it does vary by school. The grades that we serve are pre-K through 5th grade. Some offerings at schools include game time, homework help, yoga, and movie time. And for additional fees, some sites offer dance, cheerleading, karate, and again, that just depends upon the particular site. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see some information that we tried implementing last school term, and we moved towards standardizing some of those things, which included consistency in the scheduling, staffing ratios, and then providing at least 2 trips or fun days that were free of charge to parents and students. The next after-school program that's in our department is the Nita M. Lowy 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant. We have 2 of those, an elementary one and a middle school one. Next slide, please. The 21st Century Elementary grant is in partnership with the Boys and Girls Club of Athens. This programming is grant funded based upon an approved grant application from the Georgia Department of Education. There are specific parameters with pre-established goals and objectives that we must meet, which were written in the grant application. It's a 5-year grant and we're in year 2. There are no fees to the families. There are 2 locations, the H.T. Edwards location, which is behind the BOE, and then the Smilo location, which is on 4th Street. It's open to all students at all 14 elementary schools. It meets Monday through Friday from 3 until 6. It's available early September through the last day of school. It can only serve 125 students per site, which is a total of 250 students across the elementary grant. The selection criteria is based upon what was written in the grant application, which includes but not limited to meeting standards, working below grade level, and retention. Some data from, next slide. Some data from the 21st Century Grant at the Boys and Girls Club from the 2019-2020 school year prior to the pandemic. The average number of students per day, Smilo served 111 students, which was about 89% of our target. H.T. Edwards served 104 students, which was 83% of our targets. And we served grades 1st through 5th. Some program offerings at that site are academics, academic enrichment, homework help, culinary arts, financial literacy, arts and crafts, recreation time, and coding. We also were able to offer free field trips to parents and students. Some of those trips were World of Coke, Center for Puppetry Arts, Chick-fil-A Hall of Fame, and the Legoland. And on the right side of this slide, I have defined what is academic enrichment, because academic enrichment is important to the 21st Century Grant. It's throughout the requirements, but it's also important to after-school programs in general. So academic enrichment is supplemental learning opportunities that advance their mastery of academic subjects and engage them so much that they don't realize that they are learning. An example of that might be the culinary arts program, where students are enhancing their math and reading skills, they're reading recipes, they're measuring things. Or another example might be the yearbook club, where they are also writing articles and things of that nature. So it's a combination of academics and enrichment. Our middle school 21st Century Grant, very similar to the elementary. Once again, it is grant funded based upon an approved application from the Georgia Department of Education. There are specific parameters with pre-established goals and objectives to meet. They are, however, different from the goals and objectives in the elementary grant. It also is a 5-year grant. We're in year 1. There are no fees to families. We serve 4 locations, BHL, Clark Middle, Coyle, and Hillsman. It's open to all students at each of those sites. It meets Monday through Thursday from 3:45 until 6 p.m. It's available early September through early May. The middle school grant can only serve 45 students per site for a total of 180 students across the middle school grant. The selection criteria is based upon what's written in the grant, which includes but not limited to not meeting standards, working below grade level, and past retention. Next slide, please. Data from the 2019-2020 school year for the middle school students is as follows. The average number of students per day, there were 34 students, about 76% of our target. Clark Middle and Coyle were about 30 students per day, 67% of the target, and Hillsman served about 40 students, 89% of the targets. The grades served are 6 through 8. The offerings are academics, academic enrichment, homework help, culinary arts, physical fitness, coding, poetry, science Olympiad, chorus, martial arts, and robotics. Also, just as in the elementary grant, students had the opportunity to take field trips that were free of charge. Some examples of those field trips were the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, the Body Exhibit Show, the Fox Theater, and the CNN Center. Next slide, please. And also, as a disclaimer, the elementary and the middle school grant is operating on a modified time schedule due to COVID. So both elementary and middle school grant meet from 4:30 until 6 o'clock every day. but the times that I have listed in the slides are the approved times when we submitted our grant application to Godot. And finally, both grants have a summer component. Next slide, please. If you'll go back one. Okay, thank you. That was it, yeah. The summer component is grant funded, as I mentioned. It was written into the grant when we submitted our application. We must offer 4 hours per day for 16 days. The days vary based upon other CCSD programs. Once again, there are no fees to families. The locations, it depends on the availability of sites. So it's a combination of elementary and middle school sites. It's open to all students at each school. The elementary grant can serve 150 students in the summer, and the middle school grant can serve 180 students during the summer. The selection criteria is pretty much the same as it is during the regular school year. And now I'll turn it over to Ms. Hope McGuire.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you guys today. So I'm going to pick up with Pathways to Success program, which is our PSP, also known as tutoring that happens outside of the regular instructional day. Next slide. So this is instruction that is received outside of the regular school hours. It can be before or after school. It can be a Saturday academy. And some schools even do summer school programs that are specific just to their students. It's to build students' capacity and close learning gaps through enrichment and acceleration. So a lot of times when we hear about summer school programs or after school tutoring programs, we focus on those students that need enrichment, but this also can be used for students who need to be accelerated. There are some students who might sit at the same 80% and they've always been there. But once you get to a particular grade, that now might put you below grade level or not up in the distinguished category. So acceleration is also something that can be provided. It's It is school-led program that is aligned to data-driven decisions and students' area of academic need. This is funded by school allocations through their Fund 150. And Fund 150 is the consolidation of their title grant funds along with their general operating budget funds. The district in my office, we do allocate 20-day funds based off of the QBE. And so that is a part of my District 100 budget. And so each school has an allocation for that as well. Next slide. Last year for the 2019-2020 school year prior to the pandemic, 9 out of the 21 schools provided a PSP program. So this was my first year in Clark County as the Director of Academic Support Special Projects in Title I. And so one of the things that I wanted schools to start focusing on was value added or education investment. So when you're using your funds, are you using your funds just to do an after school program because you've always done it? Or are you being very intentional with what you're doing during the after school tutoring process? So a lot more saw that it was more beneficial for them to have 180 days of effective first instruction and then limit some of the actual tutoring because they were given more support during the school year. It was targeted instruction in reading and math, which was site specific, and PSP did pause because of COVID-19 and just the safety issues. We also wanted to make sure to balance out the social emotional support of students and staff during this time and did not want to continue at the moment with the virtual part, even though there are some sites that are doing it virtually this year. This is always tied to research-based instructional strategies and target funding to the areas of need with a very specific focus. And I'll get into that a little bit later. So as the Title I Part A director, one of the things that I've been really focused on is making sure that we use our district level grant funds. So prior to me starting, the summer school that year supported a K through 12 opportunity for summer that was on reading and math, half day in the morning, and then there were different program offerings, half day in the afternoon. I have listed here for you that program just that was held in the month of June cost us over $603,000 out of Title I Part A set-aside grant funds. Last year, because of COVID, we only focused on high school because they were able to do theirs virtually through many different resources with E2020, credit recovery, teachers fluctuating their hours when they were supporting students. And that actually came in at $115,000. Next slide. And so here are some of the limitations that we just want to bring forth and kind of retrain our mind. A lot of times when we think of tutoring, we are thinking of just the basic sitting in front, reading a book, going through that process. And so these are some things that we can do to start thinking outside and being more innovative as a consolidation of funds district and as a charter district, along with the support of Athens-Clarke County Commission. So Title I Part A set aside for summer programs, there's 20-day, but what happens is if we put so much money to the set aside for just June, that reduces the school's allocation that they have to use for the other 180 days of instruction that they give to all students. Traditionally, you have the summer program just in June. You have it set up to where it's a tier system of who is participating. And sometimes you capture the ones that you want to come, and then other times you don't. So we want to think of being traditional with some of our instruction. So I love the way that we were looking at having some outside agencies talk about different ways. One of my favorite things to do is get kids into poetry and poetry slams. It's another way for them to incorporate reading. It's another way to build their writing and listening skills. And it's also a way to express whatever is going on, because your poem is your poem and it doesn't have to be compared to anybody else's. It only has to be compared to how you feel about it. Another thing to think about is also, as we were talking about some opportunities, is a way to incorporate technology, math, is to think about us actually creating a STEM lab or music studio. A lot of upper elementary students, I've been in Title I for 21 years, so I taught 4th and 5th grade. A lot of them like to actually do anything that's allowing them to be creative, and coding and computer programming and working in music helps them do a lot of that. So we want to show other ways that we can support doing actual tutoring, but making it fun while they're learning. There was a decline of our 21st century grant. High school did have a grant at one time. And so that did impact those schools' budgets because they were declined for the upcoming renewal. And we don't know if that program is coming back. ASP is tied to parent funded. So the catch with that is we have some sites that cannot maintain their staffs. Luckily, a site like Gaines was able to rebuild their program with the support of Leisure Services, but we still have other schools that cannot actually pay their staff if they go too far over their enrollment or if parents are not able to pay. One of the other things is ASP is no longer under the supervision of DFACS. They are under Bright from the start. So there are different scenarios and procedures that have to be followed, like a daycare center, that a lot of our schools are not set up for as an after-school program. So it actually impacts the school's budgets even more with ASP. So one of the things that Dr. Pope and I did last year was we were trying to see what was the benefit, what would be the benefit of moving ASP from it being supported by CCSD versus a vendor coming in and just renting our facilities and taking care of that for us to ensure that we had equal programming at every site. Because of the pandemic, we had to stop that request for proposals, but we looked to try to think outside the box of what could be best for after school programming at all of our elementary schools and maybe even our middle schools, as we are heading into a time where a lot of parents are still wanting some support for after school childcare for middle school students as well. And that is it for our presentation, and we're ready for questions.
So in terms of ASP, what kind of numbers? I know we're it's a challenge in some of our schools, but what are the numbers that we've, and you may have said this, but what are the numbers that we reached before the pandemic?
So there's a range. So one of our smallest sites may have had 25 students per day, but our larger sites may have had well over 300 students per day. And if you want, I can provide more specific numbers site by site. I can send that to you, but there is a wide range just because that it just depends upon the site.
And there are no scholarships for this particular program, right?
There isn't. Well, I should say to a limited degree. There was a criteria that we were in the process of establishing where we would like to look at providing scholarships to students, but there was not an established protocol across all 14 sites.
And Mr. Davis, I think that's what Ms. McGuire was referencing when she was talking about defects. I think that's what you were talking about, because there had been funds that parents could draw from through the state to help cover the cost of ASP. And that was, and I can't think of the name of it now, but that was
CAPS.
Thank you, CAPS. And so that was paid through the Department of Family and Children's Services. And so what I just heard her saying was now that's from Bright from the start, but there was a supplement. In some cases, it paid it all depending on the family, where they could bill that through the Department of Children's Family and Children's Services. And then I know at one point, when Dr. Means was here, he was looking to support all of the schools to be able to have some form of after school, but I think it started to run into budget issues. And then there was some efforts to combine those smaller programs. But if you take, for instance, like a Howard B. Stroud, right next door to that is Boys and Girls Club. So that need wouldn't be as great as it might be at a Timothy or a Barnett Shoals, where you might not have that same resource, or you have different parent demographics that are looking for different avenues for their children after school.
And then just to piggyback on that, and also Dr. Yeager, I see your question. So one of the things that happened was prior to me starting, CAPS had been able to be used for after school programming. Once it moved to Bright from the start, there were different evaluation standards that actually meant more money had to be put in for staff training. They had to take coursework. They had to, they always do first aid and CPR, but it was other classes that they would have to take, almost like they were daycare workers. And that would have impacted schools' budgets by, I think the overall cost was $15,000 to $20,000 to make sure that they had all of the hours in to run their site. So we don't accept CAPS through our ASP program within CCSD. They can go around and actually use their resources going directly to defects. Now, Dr. Yeager, for your question, the reason why we looked at vendors is because a site like Barnett Shoals in Timothy was hosting 150 students, where we have Fowler or maybe even Stroud, even though they had a Boys and Girls Club, their after school program maybe had 20, 25 students. On a good day, maybe 15 showed up. And so the balance was throwing off with being able to have parents who pay and pay your staff, and then they couldn't really afford for any enrichment activities because a lot of the enrichment activities had an additional cost. We looked at vendors who would already have the enrichment built in. So it would be one flat rate. And then that would allow them to have one parent rate going to someone who can provide all those services. The other thing is, and this is something I've never seen, is that a school system holds the after school parent funded program. Usually most school systems only use programs that their funding goes to and not the parent funded ones. So when my 3 kids were in North Carolina with me, We paid the YMCA, and they just paid the school a facility fee to use the gym, the library, and the cafeteria. So we are just trying to see what could be the best process to make sure that all of our kids had a really enriched after school program, and could have those offerings without having to pay additional funds on top of it. And they could accept CAPs because they're an outside vendor. And so they would already know those qualifications to be a CAP vendor.
And I'll
So
be
my question was,
Mr. Davis's question. I'm sorry, Dr. Thomas.
Oh, no, I'll be really quick because I know I'm watching Mr. Harris's face and trying to stay on according to our time. Just to add to what Ms. McGuire said, that so many of our schools, Dr. Yeager, it would be just basically after school childcare with some tutoring and some outdoor activities. But then for others, they may have a drumming class, karate and taekwondo, sewing that comes in, but all of those were, as she said, additional costs to parents. So there was the flat fee for ASP, but then, you would pay the karate instructor, you would pay the dance teacher, you would pay. And so we felt like this would possibly be a more equitable option because it would allow families who are really just strapped and only able to pay that flat after school fee for their children to still have some enrichment opportunities beyond the child care, homework help. And nothing is wrong with that, but we wanted to have it where all of our kids could have the opportunity to do some of that enrichment as well. There you go, Dr. Pope, sorry.
No problem. I just wanted to answer Mr. Davis's question about 21st century and the number of students that we can serve. So the middle school grant, we can serve the same number of students during the school year as we can during the summer. The elementary grant, however, there is a reduction. During the school year, we can serve 250 students, but in the summer, we can serve 150.
Mr. Harris, I'll be really, really quick. But I had a question about, I don't know if it's 21st century or possibly PSP, but I know Hillsman offered services for students before school started. They could come earlier in the morning and maybe play basketball to help get that energy out, so that they could focus if they were one of our exceptional students or not. Is that offered through your program is my first question. And if it is, my follow-up would be, is that available to all of the middle schools in CCSD?
So that program at Hillsman was a component of 21st century, and that was standard across all 4 middle schools. They had that morning component. Now it may look different, but they all had that component where teachers could come in and offer different services as a part of 21st century.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tim Jensen asked a question in the chat about, we talked about being almost full in terms of 21st century, but not quite. What might be the reasons for that?
So just at the cusp, I guess, of the pandemic, the spring is always hard because students start participating in various sporting events and things of that nature. So the numbers always drop. But say early April, mid-April, those numbers always rebound because for whatever reason, they may or may not have made the team or what have you. So they always came back to 21st century. So we always see that slump in the spring and then we rebound.
If I could have just a follow-up question on that, and thank you, Greg, for throwing that in there. And I know this was talked about a little bit about potentially consolidating some of these programs and the funding that CCSD here has. I mean, have we, how far have we explored that? And have we also explored, with ACC's programs at some of our own centers, basically really working together so that we're consolidating these programs so we don't have overlapping programs and overlapping funding models? I mean, how far has that been explored, and can we explore it further?
Well, if you ask me, we're definitely going to be exploring a lot more. I'm coming up on year 2. So the first year, I made it through learning about the world of Athens, Clarke County and enjoying CCSD. Year 2, I've made it through a pandemic. without worrying about anybody. And so we definitely are looking at collaborating more. I do have meetings with Josh Pavin on Wednesday. I work very closely with Mr. Harris. And so we are getting into this transition now. I know for my office, the main thing was making sure that we had all the main people on our bus. And so we have our wonderful superintendent, Dr. Thomas. We have our new set board. We have you guys as commissioners. So I definitely see tonight as the jump off start for us. And then the great thing is being a charter district and then also having these consolidation of funds that schools have that innovation to use, that we're going to be able to start thinking outside the box and providing our students with exactly what they need.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, I definitely will say that, at least speaking for myself, and I think for a lot of the commission, we'd be very happy to be able to work with y'all so that any program that we're offering is working in tandem and only boosting what y'all are doing so we can just be getting to even more kids. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Ms. Hope and Dr. Pope. We are going to go to our last presentation of the evening, which is Dr. Grace Bagwell Adams, who will be presenting to us on the Athens Wellbeing Project.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Grace Bagwell Adams. Lawrence, thank you so much for the invitation tonight. It's ironic I'm presenting on childcare while my husband is trying to put our 3-year-old down. So if you hear a baby crying in the background, that's who you hear. I'm Grace Bagwell Adams. I'm in the College of Public Health. I'm on faculty and also the Assistant Dean for Outreach, Engagement, and Equity. And my main project is the Athens Wellbeing Project. And I really was invited here tonight to talk a little bit about the childcare landscape and to just really give you an overview of some of the data that we have. And I also make a couple of notes about some of the research and data that I've looked at since COVID-19 has hit, because the landscape has definitely been shifting quite a bit, as has everything else due to the pandemic. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Just a quick thank you to our institutional partners, Clark County School District and the Unified Government being two of those, in addition to Family Connection Communities and Schools, Envision Athens, United Way, both hospitals, Piedmont St. Mary's, University of Georgia, Athens Housing Authority, and the Community Foundation, who's our sort of our champion and the herder of all the cats. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick overview. I have hopped on the call a little bit early, so I know there has already been some discussion about CAPS and about some of the infrastructure and support for families at the federal and state level, but I'm going to do a little bit of vocabulary building on that and then talk about cost and availability, sources of childcare, levels of satisfaction, and resources that families depend on. All of these data that I'm presenting tonight are from the 2018-2019 Athens Wellbeing Project data. So these are pre-pandemic, but one note that I want to make about that is that basically any trend that you see and any trend that we see in the data pre-pandemic has basically been exacerbated by the pandemic. So that's kind of the direction that we see things moving in. And we plan to go back out into the field in 2021 in the fall, provided the conditions are appropriate and safe. Next slide. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be talking about childcare, some terminology. First, we've got formal childcare. And when I talk about a childcare center, that means a licensed center. The Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, right from the start, is our state agency that handles that licensing. A childcare learning home is 3 to 6 children, but also goes through a formal process of licensure. Next slide, please. This is, of course, sort of in juxtaposition to informal sources of childcare. So it doesn't mean that a family doesn't have a formal arrangement with any of these parties that I'm going to list, but it's just, this is not, these childcare providers are not covered by right from the start. So grandparents, babysitters or nannies, family, friends, siblings, other relatives. And this is going to be really important in a moment when I start talking about the sources that our families with children are relying on in Clark County for childcare. Next slide. Couple of other notes of importance. We have a quality rated childcare system in Georgia. This is also run by the Department of Early Care and Learning. At this point, this is not required of our licensed childcare centers, but it is really important because in addition to being what the agency says is, of course, this independent resource to kind of rate the quality of childcare centers. It also is on the policy agenda of the state agency to tie participation in quality rated to being able to receive CAPS funding from the state. So that's why it's really, really important. We're not quite there yet. They were going to transition to that model in 2020. The pandemic put that off, but that is certainly what we're looking at in the future. So that's really important for us to consider. Next slide. So the formal child care assistance program for families in terms of paying for child care in the state is called CAPS, Child Care and Parent Services, also administered by that same state agency, DCAL. And it's for low-income families who also are working or in school at least 24 hours a week. That's who's eligible. Remember, as with all programs that are in place for vulnerable families, just because you're eligible doesn't mean you actually get the benefit, but that's what the eligible criteria are. And the idea is that it subsidizes cost of childcare. Next slide. Okay. So I'm going to transition now, and Lawrence, in respect of our time, I'm going to try to make it through these slides pretty quickly, just in case we have some questions. I know I've got to make some time up for you guys. You don't want to be here all night. But this is a snapshot of Athens-Clarke County families with children. When the pandemic hit, we released a one-pager that's on our website. I recommend anybody that's interested to go to athenswellbeingproject.org. All the data that you see presented here tonight are there in report format and one-pager format. But just a quick snapshot before we dig into childcare about some of the things that families are juggling and trying to balance. We ask in the Athens Wellbeing Project survey lots of questions in different domains of life. And so that's when you're going to see kind of a quick kind of 10,000 foot view here, some different things that we ask about. One thing is we ask about experiencing difficulty when trying to take time off of work to take care of personal or family matters. That is more salient than ever in the face of COVID-19, especially given that we have lots of issues with families trying to figure out where children are going to go or when they have dependents or loved ones who are sick. 73% fall into that category. Half report having no paid sick leave, paid vacation time, or paid family leave with their employment. Half. And again, this is from a sample of ACC families with children. 58% work 30 hours or more, and 30% work more than 40 hours per week. Next slide. And you marry that with some of these other sort of worrying indicators on socioeconomic stability. 1 in 3 of these families report being unable to afford balanced meals, sometimes or often. 3 in 4 worry about how they would pay for an unexpected medical bill. And nearly 1 in 4 do not have a checking or a savings account. So when we talk about fragile families in Clarke County, you know, it's interesting because a lot of the times we talk about just our really low income families, but if you think back to that previous slide, it's really 3 in 4 families, you know, 50% to 75% of our families that are falling in these categories of either not having adequate support for being able to take paid leave or sick leave, or not having the support in place if they do have to take leave in terms of childcare, et cetera. So this is the overwhelming majority of families with children are really struggling with these issues. Next slide. So in the following slides, you're going to see that we've broken up our data into 4 categories. The full sample, which is everybody that answered the survey. Full sample is representative to Clarke County. Then we looked at just everybody in the data with young children. Then we looked at those who are at 130% federal poverty and below, and then 130% federal poverty line with young children. If you look at the percent of households who said they were using some kind of childcare, you've got 62% of families with children, and we define young children as those being less than age 6, who are using some kind of childcare. That number drops off dramatically across both of these graphs whenever you look at low-income families with young children, okay? We also ask questions about the percent of households using childcare over the summer and school holidays. Why is that question particularly salient now? Because with school closures, of course, this is the category of folks who have to really rely on childcare when schools are closed. So think about that now over an expanded period of time because of COVID-19. Next slide. When we dug into the data, you know, I have a young child. I know how much we pay for childcare per month. It's expensive. We wanted to take a look at among those families who indicated that they are paying for childcare, what on average are families spending? On average in Athens, Georgia, from these data, what we see is that for families with children less than age 6, so they're typically looking for full-time childcare, we see $559 on average per month. $559 on average per month, which is a lot of money. You're going to see the ranges in just a second. If we look at the average household income in Athens, around $24,000, according to census data last year in 2019 dollars, and you think about the fact that 559 of those dollars would go to childcare, that's about 28% of a family's pay every month going to childcare, and that's just for one child. Okay, so this is just kind of looking at one child. Keep going to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, and you can click to the next slide because it'll highlight what we want to look at. There we go. Okay. What we did in addition to looking at Athens Wellbeing Project data is we actually called childcare centers at 2 points in time, August 2019 and January 2020. We focused just on Athens Clarke County quality rated childcare centers. Actually pulled the January 2021 data from DeKalb today. As of right now, there are 13 total childcare centers in Clarke County that are quality rated and 2 home-based learning centers. But if you look at this range here, as I said, on average, you've got this average monthly cost in a center being well over $600. The last figure I showed you was on average what families are spending regardless of childcare source. Okay, so that might be what they're paying in an informal arrangement. It could be some combination of childcare sources. But when families go to a center, the average monthly cost increases substantially. The upper limit, of course, being that some people are paying well over $1,000 per month per child for childcare in Athens Clarke County in these childcare centers. This is not unusual. This is our local market. Of course, if you go to major urban centers, this becomes even more expensive. We also asked, in addition to cost, when we surveyed centers, how many openings they had at the time. Now, again, this is a very quick snapshot. But at that time, for infants up to 12 months, we only found that 3 centers actually had any openings at all in that age category. And if you look at the 4+ category, that's even fewer. At that time, that there were only 0. Now, why is this important at all? Well, because it's clearly demonstrating a constrained supply when it comes to childcare sources and childcare spots, at least when it comes to childcare centers that are quality rated. But it also is concerning because this, again, was before COVID-19, okay? And so this is before the economic fallout, before mass closures, before lots of people who are dealing with sickness and sick family members. And so it's just become more complicated since then. Next slide. The next thing, you can go ahead and click to the next one, so it's a lot of numbers. Yeah, there we go. All right. So what we also asked about is where people get their childcare. So who are parents relying on for general childcare? Let me just go ahead and say none of these columns are going to total to 100% because we had respondents select all that apply. And even families who have no income restraints or constraints, it's a patchwork, right? Even in a childcare center that's open almost all the time, there's still going to be a few professional learning days per year. And typically parents still have to show up to work. So then they have to figure out where to take their child on those professional learning days. That's a best case scenario. So the point is, lots of people, almost everyone, relies on what I would call a patchwork approach to childcare. But we can see a few patterns emerge here. If you look at childcare source, childcare center, 48% of the full sample with children less than 6 years old have a child in a childcare center. If you look at low income, though, that's a statistically significant difference. It drops to 30%. Okay. And again, if you think back to the cost of how much more expensive a center is, this begins to make sense. If you flip that, low income families are far more likely to have to rely on a grandparent. Okay. Same things were with family friends. If you look at the full sample, 16% with children less than 6 years old rely on a family friend. 45% of those who are low income rely on a family friend. So the patterns that we're seeing systematically are that, again, everybody's using this patchwork approach, but low-income families are having to rely far more on those informal sources of childcare. And it's not necessarily a quality issue or always a preference issue. I mean, certainly there are lots of families who prefer over and above any childcare center for their child to stay with a grandparent or a loved one, for sure. But when it comes to thinking about some of the challenges of informal childcare, it becomes difficult sometimes whenever, for example, you have that caregiver get sick, and then the family has to figure out where to take that child once the grandparent or the family friend is sick and can't take care of their child. Whereas in a center, if the teacher becomes sick, typically they have a substitute that can step in and work that day. So it's important. I'm not making any normative value judgments about what's better, what, one or the other, but it is important to think about the trade-offs, the pros and cons of each situation when it comes to childcare, and how formal childcare in a lot of cases can just be more reliable because of something like illness, for example. Keep going. Okay, same question, summer, holiday childcare, same patterns, right? So the families that have more resources are more able to pay for formal childcare. The families that don't, very, very few low-income families are able to have those formal kind of arrangements for summers or holidays. Keep going. One of the interesting things that we asked about for the folks that indicated that they had issues with satisfaction in their childcare, we asked about satisfaction. And then for those that said that they weren't satisfied, we asked why not. And what we found is that a lot of people are not satisfied with the arrangements because there's just not a lot available, especially for low-income families who indicated that more satisfactory childcare was not available for hours when they worked or studied. And we know that lots of low-income families in particular are juggling multiple jobs and maybe school at the same time. And it really becomes difficult, especially when you're working second or third shift, to find formal childcare arrangements for your children. Next slide. Okay, so here are the takeaways. Lawrence, by some miracle, I'm coming in at 7:19, even with all those numbers. The slides are going to be made available. Please email me at the end if you'd like to. I think that what we see consistently, childcare is expensive. Childcare is limited in supply. It's extremely patchwork, especially for low income. Yet, despite all of these things, what we know is that it's essential for parents to be able to go to work, for them to be able to go to school, and for them to be fully present. And I think that any of the figures or numbers that you saw today really are conservative, given what we're facing with COVID-19. One last thing I'll say is, my husband actually works for the Department of Early Care and Learning. He's a community coordinator for them. So I have a front row seat to a lot of what that state agency is trying to do in the face of COVID-19. And one question I've asked him was, what are you seeing in terms of center closures? Because one of the big concerns was that COVID would affect the business model such that we would have lots of childcare centers closing in Athens-Clarke County. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but it hasn't happened to the extent that I think that people are afraid of yet. Now, it doesn't mean that's not something that we should be thinking about. But basically, it is of paramount importance. I think this is one of the most important things that we can think about as a community when you start thinking about how we support our families to be successful. And I focused a lot on this presentation on parents with young children who are less than 6 years of age. But with COVID, of course, this really extends now up to children of all ages because of the shift that we've had to make for virtual learning. Next slide. All righty. And all of this can be found in our child care report. It's on our website. That's my email, Meg Bramlett. It's my fabulous doctoral student. That's her email. If anyone watching this or attending this call wants to get in touch with me, please feel free to email me at my UGA email address. And as I said, all of this is already available on our website. So I think I see the chat blowing up a little bit. Lawrence, do I have any time for questions, or do you want me to keep moving?
You do. You can take several questions, and then we'll give Dr. Scott a chance to ramp up. But please feel free to take questions.
Awesome. Okay. So if you want to just drop them in the chat, I'll do what I can. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. So we'll just do the best we can. Any
I
questions?
said, Commissioner Link, I saw you unmuted yourself. So if you wanted to
Yes.
say yours out loud, that's fine.
Yeah, I was just typing into the chat. I have questions or concerns or just would like some input on the relevance of the location of childcare centers. When you showed that one chart that basically says that there's only about a dozen childcare centers in the entire county. And you know, from what I understand, a lot of them are kind of concentrated on the west side. There's very little even choice for folks, even if they do have the means. There's very little choice for them on the east side. And also we have these home-based childcare centers, but it's very difficult for folks to open those. We did make some changes pretty recently to our zoning codes that make it a little bit easier for individual volunteers to have those home-based centers. But the state law is pretty stringent. Apparently Georgia has some of the most stringent laws in the nation as far as the qualifications to open those kind of centers. Do you have any input on that, on the relevance of the location, you know, as far as like travel time and the convenience factor for families who might also have kids in elementary school or whatever?
Yes, Commissioner Link, thank you for that comment and that question. I think first I want to clarify that the data I presented in terms of cost and availability of slots was from a smaller sample of total childcare facilities. So in Athens-Clarke County, right now we have 42 licensed childcare facilities. Okay. We have 15 quality rated childcare facilities. Okay. And the sampling that I did was from that. Now, that being said, it's even with 42, we have a constrained supply based on the data that we see in the Athens Wellbeing Project, right? Because we have thousands and thousands of children in this county who need childcare. To the next question about location, we did not collect data on that in particularly, but we know where these childcare centers are because there's a list of them provided by the Department of Early Care and Learning in terms of licensed childcare facilities. So if there's anybody on this call with a skill in GIS that wants to map it out and start looking at it, I think that's an important and great question. You know, and all I can say there is location is key. I mean, as we know, access to food, to school, to work, to childcare. I mean, it's fundamental to survival and certainly to thriving. So we haven't studied that question in particular, but like many other things and resources, what you find is, you know, clustering of these entities in, especially the childcare centers, you know, where there are more people, more resources, more everything, right? So
yeah,
it is an important question that can be answered. And again, if there's anybody who wants to dive into that's listened to this, or Jerry Shannon, my colleague who does GIS, if that's something he's interested in, I don't know, but a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we might want to look at on the county level, because we do have, you know, funding as part of our SPLOS. We've indicated that childcare is a goal of some of those projects. So maybe, and Kelly, maybe can we have our GIS department look into mapping the centers that are available so we can start envisioning locations moving forward?
That is a layer that we can put on there. Certainly.
Okay.
I guess the
I think it
follow
would
on,
be really
Commissioner.
helpful.
Blaine, did you have something?
No, I guess just understanding the follow on, Commissioner Link, would be the most important thing.
I wanted to answer this question from Tish Yeager, and her question is, from the report, what was the reason that people were unhappy with their childcare? It really comes down, of course, to two main things. There are several items that families could choose from, but affordability and flexibility were two of the main things. And when we talk about flexibility, the real barrier there is the hours of operation is often a real issue for families, because again, it conflicts with when they actually have to work or go to school. Let's see, any others? Trying to keep up with the chat. I'm not doing a great job. Any other questions?
There's one from Greg Davis in there.
Thank you. Greg, can you clarify what you mean by where it fits in?
Well, I'm just trying to, I mean, I know that early learning, I mean, it's a school. I mean, we educate children, but that also does provide, I mean, childcare in a loose sense. So I guess when parents are saying that they're averaging like 24 hours, is that an exclusion to early learning, or where does early learning from CCSD, where does that fit into the needs of the parents?
So the early learning slots and we've got so many more specialists on these questions than me on this call. So Lawrence, the early learning center are we talking really about Head Start and early Head Start, those slots?
I believe, is that your question, Mr. Davis?
Right, I'm not sure what he's asking either.
Well, okay, I'm just trying to figure out is that we've got parents who are trying to work 30, 40, 50 hours a week. And so if they have a child who is 4 years old, wouldn't some of those hours be were they not being early learning with CCSD?
Yeah, I think.
Are we talking about childcare after that, on the weekends?
Yeah, so the Head Start program no doubt provides incredible support. I mean, my understanding is that there's always a waiting list of there's more demand than supply for those slots as well. And again, the traditional hours of all childcare really mirrors what has usually been the traditional work week of Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or 7 to 6. But there are very few formal childcare settings that offer options at night and on the weekends. Very few, regardless of who's providing the childcare. I only know of one specific childcare center in town, for example, that provides care overnight. So there, that's a conflict and a constraint of the system that, and this is why, again, back to the patchwork nature, why so many families are left to rely on family, friends, relatives, even older siblings to fill in those gaps, especially in those non-traditional hours. Any other questions?
I just put it, I'm sorry, Greg, I was just saying, I put it in the chat. So right now, since pre-K is virtual, we're looking at having pre-K for maybe 2 hours each day. And our pre-K program here in Athens-Clarke County is wonderful, but still as a parent, it's only 2 hours a day. And even with the in-person option, it still doesn't cover a full work day. So how that covers childcare, it does in some instances. But as a parent, I see it, there's still many more gaps that we have to rely on to be able to fill with that. And I think Mayor Gertz also placed something in the chat with his experience with childcare as well with pre-K.
Mayor Gertz, did you want to speak to that?
Well, it's anecdotal. It's an N of one, but my 4-year-old niece is struggling with the online platform, and subsequently my PhD candidate sister is in the same boat. I do want to make a very brief mention that I think one of the things that our economic development department can do can make employers more aware of both the federal and state credits. There are credits associated with providing childcare, so the operation and maintenance of that function. And there's a separate credit for construction of childcare facilities for employers. And that may be a ripe area for us to look at those projects where we've baked in the opportunity for childcare, like the Classic Center and the new courthouse. Should we be able to partner with some other private employers who would be able to, as a private entity, take advantage of those tax credits?
Mayor Gertz, I think that would be wonderful. I'm very interested in learning how we can advance those initiatives.
I would just encourage all, tonight I was invited, I think, to scratch the surface on this issue and just do a little bit of education on what data we have. And, we do have really rich data on the landscape in Clark County. And I encourage you to look at the report and also just to use the resource of the Department of Early Care and Learning, because we do have a community coordinator for Clark County, who's Clayton Adams, my husband. Again, he preaches to me about this all the time, but there's a plug. But yeah, I think just using those resources and getting a conversation going. And again, thank you to Lawrence so much for the opportunity to present. I mean, if this is a spark that lights a greater, longer conversation, then that's wonderful. My research team has our eye on really trying to make sure that we continue to collect data, of course, from families, but also to keep an eye on the supply side, because those data are just as important. So again, I thank y'all, and I look forward to continuing to engage with both Clark County School District and Athens Clark County for Athens Wellbeing Project. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you, Grace. So everyone, hopefully you all have enjoyed those presentations. You all are for a treat for this next session. This is the last part of our collaborative meeting. Now it's time to jump into the work. After hearing those 4 presentations, I do want to just kind of state that it's very easy sometimes to want to jump straight to the solution. I know there are some colleagues on the call who are part of our Harvard Bloomberg team, and so that's some of the things we learned during that initiative. But tonight, we aren't going to jump straight into solutions, but Dr. Jennifer Scott, who's our Executive Director of Leadership Development, will be guiding you actually through a problem analysis. We all heard 4 great presentations from 4 amazing leaders in the community, in the district, in Athens, Clark County, and UGA. So now we want to engage you in a conversation and discussion around just deconstructing the problems that we hear and we have seen. Some of them were already stated, but Dr. Scott will walk us through this, and then when we are done, we'll close it out. I do want to make sure everybody knows, of course, this meeting is live, so it's recorded, but we also will be sending out notes. So that way, if you are trying to jot fast as people talk, we want you to be engaged. So don't feel like you have to stop and take the notes as we go. We will send those out to you. So if you just want to engage and be active participants, it'd be appreciated. So without further ado, Dr. Scott, the show is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And as he stated, this is an opportunity for us to really just take everything that's been shared over the last couple of hours and just digest it, because it's a lot of information coming from multiple sources to allow us to really look at where we stand as a city, as a county, and what we might identify as our next steps. And so I cannot re-emphasize enough that this is our opportunity to really dig into the problem. And so it's a problem analysis. We're not going to really move into the solution because we have to make sure that we understand the problem. And so with that, then we're going to go ahead and move forward to the next slide, please. So as you can see, this provides a general overview of what I mean by the problem analysis. So when we're thinking about a situation analysis, there are 3 parts to it as identified by Kepner and Trago, that you would have the problem analysis, the decision analysis, and then potential problem analysis. So that's predicting what might happen in the future and looking at how we might be able to prevent that from happening. So taking those preventative measures. So as we think about our problem analysis, then we're moving at looking at all of the pieces of it from what we've heard tonight, dissecting that to really get at what is truly the problem that we're facing before we move into solution-oriented thinking. Because if we don't clearly understand the problem, then we might be working on the wrong thing and come up with solutions that don't really get at the root of what we're seeing happening. So I'm going to move right in because this is the time that I really want you all to be engaged. We've had a lot of opportunity to hear a great deal of information. So now I really want you all to fully engage in that analysis process and engage in some discussion. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about a problem analysis, we are understanding a real world problem. So we're trying to understand what the problem is from what we perceive it to be, but then also what we desire it to be. So we're thinking about what is our current state and what would be our ideal state. Where do we want to see ourselves going? And in order to do that, then we also have to be able to understand the impact of it. So who's impacted by this problem and what's the magnitude of it? So how might we address it? And then we're moving into preparing for the solutions or the action. So I want us to just get into some discussion around a couple of questions that would allow us to really dig into and dissect all of the information so that when we leave here tonight, then we are moving forward with knowing and understanding that we have a common understanding of the problem that we need to potentially solve. And then we're ready to move into the actual action portions of that, of how do we solve that problem? So I want us to start with this question here. So in hearing the presentations provided this evening from the various agencies and organizations, what is your perception of the current summer opportunities? And I'm not even going to limit it to summer. So I'm going to say the current opportunities available for youth. And so when we're thinking about those current opportunities available for you, does that align with your prior knowledge? How does it compare to your ideal situation? I'm just going to open the floor for open conversation around that so that we can begin that dialogue and begin to jot notes surrounding these ideas.
Well, I'm speaking for myself. I was very impressed with the number of programs that Leisure Services has. I have not have children. I've never had children in the Clark County School District, so I thus have not been following it as closely as parents would have. My ideal situation would be for every child, though, to have options, and that it be based on the financial resources of the family.
I think, Jennifer, that even before we begin talking about program expansion, which I think we all see some need for, we would at least want complete utilization of the programs that do exist. You know, we wouldn't want empty slots.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think that actually came up as an earlier question around why did we see some low numbers in some areas. And then we talked about that around participation even of ASP programs, and then looking at Leisure Services and what their numbers, and thinking about the number of students who are taking advantage of those scholarships, and that being one of the opportunities that Mr. Kilpatrick shared with us of wanting to look at how can we expand that. Okay, other thoughts around where you all see the current situation versus what would be the ideal situation that we want to see for youth?
I'll make a contribution here. Carol Meyer speaking. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, as someone who had raised two daughters here, there's and all the things we saw today, there's so much out there. What strikes me listening is the obstacles that keep families from having their kids participate in them all, whether they're money, transportation, childcare, getting childcare. I mean, there's one thing, like if someone, even after school or on the weekend, if you have to have childcare, and that childcare also has to be able to transport your child there. So all the obstacles that are there to take advantage and fully utilize all of these resources that we have. Because we have some phenomenal things going on.
Can I build on what Carol is saying? This is Mumby Anderson.
Yes, please.
I think I absolutely agree that there are a lot of opportunities, but there's a disconnect, I think, in a lot of the services that are offered through CCSD as well as ACC with regards to access, parents understanding and knowing when the opportunities are available. And also meeting the actual needs of the families when these services are offered, and not just offering them out of a perceived understanding of what families need. For example, a lot of the summer programs that are offered are half days. And so when you register your children for these summer programs, you still have to think about alternative childcare. And many of them do come at a cost. And if you don't qualify for scholarships, if you're sort of like in that little median range, you still have to consider cost in addition to the childcare that you also have to provide on top of that. I think for high school students and middle school even, there aren't enough opportunities for students to engage in extracurricular activities throughout the summer, and they are oftentimes one-off opportunities for a weekend or a week or every Friday, and not necessarily things that will engage them throughout the summer so that they can develop a sense of just belonging to what they're doing and having and building skills and building their social skills, etc. So I think what we're doing in ACC and CCSD is very helpful for families, but I don't know if we're doing a particularly good job at navigating, having an understanding of what their actual needs are, and then using that understanding to build the services around that.
Mumbai, since you were adding on to what I said, I want to just add on to what you said there, and thinking how access to even knowing about the programs, and in different modes. It does, like, is there a place where all of this is together, and do we have a paper format to get to people? Do we have multiple ways? But you know, I see a comparison between trying to find out where to get vaccinated for COVID, where there's information in all different places. We probably do a better job of this with these activities, but to have some sort of consolidated guide to all of these, because it takes a lot of know-how to even know that these programs exist before you even try to figure out if you can, you know, over all the obstacles. So having a centralized location and thinking about ways to get all that information to everyone in the community.
And if we're going towards ideal, I'll just say that in Baldwin County, in Milledgeville, Georgia, where I hail, we had NYSP camp. And so I think it was like the National Youth Sports Program. And our county was able to partner with our local college to provide a free camp that was between 8 and I think 2:30 or 3 o'clock p.m. that had free lunch, free registration. There was no fee associated with it, a free transportation that provided not just sports opportunities, but also enrichment activities. And I know that that's been replicated around several different counties throughout our state. So if we're looking at expanding programs, maybe exploring opportunities like that, that would get students acclimated to a college campus, get students acclimated to different enrichment opportunities, but also provide some of those childcare opportunities that would allow parents to work and trust that their children are in a safe, productive environment.
I guess I'll jump in. Am I working here? Yeah.
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, this is Jesse Houle from Commission District 6. I mean, I guess how this aligns with my prior knowledge is there were large gaps in my prior knowledge, and now there are fewer gaps, although I'm still, I'm sure there's still plenty for me to learn. So this is very helpful, and I just want to thank everybody who put this together and put these presentations together. I guess when I think of ideal situation, I'm mostly hoping that ideally we'll continue to have discussions like this and hopefully really carve out a lot of time for us to really work through ideas together moving forward. I'm worried about our duplication of efforts. You know, if there's a geospatial data collection arm of ACC Unified Government, and then also for Clark County School District and also for the Wellbeing Project, like making sure that we're collecting data that really complements each other. To hopefully both like avoid gaps in data, but also avoid duplication of efforts, because ultimately it's a lot of taxpayer money going to two different organizations, but from the same people. Yeah, I'd love to see the Wellbeing Project maybe collect more data on youth programming. My understanding is the childcare data seemed to, unless I just missed where that is on the website. But I did a tour of the library last week, and there's 75 students in non-COVID times that come from the middle school every day. And I immediately just went to, well, what about all the other middle schools that don't have a library right next door? And so trying to identify, kind of where kids are going, even when school's in session, never mind in the summer, in those later years that are still pretty early and really in need of mentorship. Anyway, that was only maybe sort of answering your questions, but thanks for providing this space. So.
No problem.
Could I just add something really quickly to sort of to what Mr. Hu just said, with the library being right next to Clark Middle School. I do remember when my son was at Clark Middle School, the library was actually overtaxed with students hanging out there because they had nowhere else to go and no other activities to participate in. So while it was a really invaluable service for students at Clark Middle, and would probably be if there were libraries next to every school in Athens, Clark County, but there aren't, that cannot be the only solution for children in that age range. And it can't be the only solution for the county to not have services offered to these groups of students, but they happenstance go to the library to hang out and be social. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, that it's not necessarily the solution.
Well, if I can build on that, Jesse, just 1 second. I mean, I know that from my understanding pre-COVID that there were a number of programs that the Clark County Library had for youth because of that very reason. And I know Cheston Communities was one. I know that AADM functioned a program there as well. And so I think that one thing that has not been part of this discussion, which is something that at the board meeting last week, Tawana Maddox, who could not be here today because of her organization, which is Destiny, was having an activity tonight. There are a lot of nonprofits who are working with our youth, and I think that in terms of getting the word out, I was talking to someone who Rebecca, who had a long conversation with her. She has an organization called Series, and she works with like 140 folks in under the age of 15 in track, both in the fall and in the spring. And I knew nothing about that program. I'd never heard of it, but they've been around since 2011. So I think that part of the discussion, and Lawrence and I talked about this earlier, but we were very aware that not everybody could present and be part of this actual discussion. But Lawrence did send out special invitations to a whole list of organizations who work with our youth, who are nonprofit, to let them know that we were having this discussion tonight. And so I think that part of my lack of knowledge still is the breadth of these organizations, what they're doing, and then what can we do to enhance their work. Looking at it in terms of a quilt, a patchwork quilt in which you have different sections, and some of our nonprofits who work with our youth, they're all part of that quilt. They just may be smaller pieces compared to CCSD or Leisure Services or UGA.
And with that, Mr. Davis, then I'm actually going to push us to our next conversation. Ms. Tillman, if you would move to the next slide. So as we've thought about this, and you all have identified some things that really stood out to you around the presentations, but then also we've already started dipping into some of the things that we might identify as potential gaps. And so if we know that this is where we currently stand, this is ideally where we would like to see ourselves going, then what are those gaps that we know of? And this is kind of pulling back from the information. Several of the presentations already identified some opportunities for their organizations or agencies, but as a whole, where are some of the gaps that we want to potentially address? And are we looking at special interest groups or demographics groups when we're thinking about those gaps?
So I guess my question would be, outside of ESP that's provided in a surrounding county, what opportunities do we have for our exceptional students? Are the camps that we're offering right now, are they wheelchair accessible? Are they designed to be inclusive rather than just, kind of geared toward our kids who are able to participate? So that's one of the gaps that I think we should really focus on, but I'm not really sure how our camps are designed. So maybe someone else can speak to that.
Attorney Hull, I think that's a great point. I'm reflecting back on my time at the building, and that was something we ran into, and not just students who may have may need like wheelchairs and other forms of assistance, but who may have some more specific needs in terms of supervision and support for after school. And it was very challenging when you're staffed with, in many cases, mostly University of Georgia students, who do a great job with the mid-range kind of behaviors, but being able to support students who had more intense needs after school, what did that support look like? And I think that would be the same thing with summer opportunities. How do you have or design programming that's able to fill that gap as well?
Very well articulated. Thank you.
I would just
struggle.
One of the gaps that I see, and some of this is a little partly personal. I have 3 kids, and so they are 18, 19, and 21. And I remember being mama bear. And so part of the gap for me was having the trust to release them to a place, because no one communicated to me how they were going to take care of my kid while they were at the actual site. So that was my kind of trust gap. I would also say that looking at special interest groups, of changing how we look at the gap groups, in the sense of, do we have any programs that are just for boys? So boys can just get around each other, so girls can get around each other and empower each other and be able to talk without worrying about, if you had a child in middle school, we understand the roller coaster years, where one minute you like somebody and the next minute you don't. But if we could separate that out, I think that's a subgroup a lot of times we don't look at. And then as the director of Title I, the one thing I see with Title I schools is, it's hard for a camp, no matter how much you provide, to sometimes compete with Grand. And that's the name for my grandmother, but she was who I would rather spend time with than go to a camp. So we have to make sure that we, like we had that program for Mommy and Me, maybe it should be like a Grand and Me, where we talk to the grandparents and the grandmothers about how that looks in supporting them and getting them involved and keeping them active in what they're doing with their grandchildren as well. So I think that's another gap that we have.
Thank you, Ms. McGuire. Commissioner Link, I see your hand.
Yeah, one resource in Athens Clarke County that I feel is really underutilized is Sandy Creek Park. And when we're talking about activities, particularly for, tweens and teens, the idea of getting these kids out in nature, and it doesn't even have to be very formalized activities, just, group hikes and boat rides and, swimming time. I feel like that is a resource, a facility here in Athens Clarke County that we could really utilize to target that population, especially for summertime activities. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is to go out to Sandy Creek and just hike in the trails and slip into the water. So but I think part of it is it's really hard to get to. We don't have a bus that goes out there, and also the signage, even pointing out the location, is really, really poor. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to put our heads together on how to get some of these teenage kids out there, especially in the summer. Get them in nature.
I practice putting my hand icon up there, so I'll speak. But I think Hope's idea about programs with grandparents and kids is brilliant. I mean, that's one of the things that stuck out to me in those numbers, that when we were looking at childcare, the number of informal family-based childcare that's going on during the school year and during the summer. And I'd be much more likely as a grandparent to go to something that's sort of geared for grandparents and kids than thinking I was going to something with some 25-year-olds with their kids. And that would be like a wonderful thing to have. Leisure services doing something like that. So that's really exciting. I think the gaps that I saw, again, were just with the teens as well. And in the summer and overall, it's just a harder group to reach, but it's a group that we need to reach as much as possible, because that's where people get lost. And so those middle school and teenage years, I'd go after.
Thank you. I saw someone else unmuted to share.
I was going to say something sort of along the lines with something Hope said about having fun and learning through fun. And I guess, you know, I'm on the school board, but I also know that my kids learn when they're having fun, and they don't always love going to school. And so and I know we also have this emphasis on social and emotional learning in the schools. And it just almost feels like these after school opportunities or out of school opportunities could really help in the social emotional learning, and just, play together, and sports or music or art or whatever it is. And the tutoring is stuff we can do inside school hours almost. I really would love to spend more time with some of the social emotional learning with the kids. I don't know how to do that necessarily. Maybe Dr. Thomas can comment, but it's outside my bailiwick. But I know my kids learn when they're not thinking about learning.
Right. And that's fine. This is a brainstorming opportunity to kind of lay it all out there. So we work collaboratively to come up with some solutions around that. So that is quite fine. Thank you, Dr. Yeager.
And I want to just add, or just really echo and follow up on what Dr. Yeager was saying. I think Mr. Davis put it in the chat, but not just some of these social emotional learning opportunities for our students, but also for our families, right? Because if our parents don't know it, it's only going to go so far if our students are learning it. So it has to be a family engagement process. And so having opportunities where we can teach our students, but also teach some of these same social emotional skills, conflict resolution skills, different skills to our family, so they can actually be developed and furthered, I think would be very beneficial.
I'm just responding to this transportation problem for Sandy Creek. And I'm thinking about how where I grew up on Long Island in New York, in the summer, there was a special bus from Freeport where you could take that and go down to the beach. I mean, couldn't we, there's some creative thinking there, use our transit to have a day or a couple of days or something to get to Sandy Creek sort of in the summer months, and that would get access to some people. It wouldn't have to be regular hours, it could be sort of special event.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers, for that insight and being solution oriented as well. Any other thoughts around other gaps that would need to be addressed in order to reach that ideal state?
I guess I'd be curious to learn about kids who are kind of falling out of the school system for one reason or another. So kids who are being disciplined or, eventually suspended, expelled, things like that. I feel like there's a real need for us to be looking out for the youth who might most need help from the local government institutions because whatever's going on in their lives. So I'd really like us to make sure we're including that in part of our discussions somehow. And I'm also curious about food insecurity. Another thing that stuck out to me about this library program is how many sandwiches they were trying to make every day, because kids didn't have food and they hadn't eaten since the lunch hour in the school. And so insofar as that kind of can be seen as a group, youth who struggle with food insecurity. And also, I guess, transportation, to piggyback on what other people have been talking about, but it's not just Sandy Creek, right? There's lots of neighborhoods full of kids that don't have a bus line. And I'd be curious, whether they might find some equivalent of the library to go to or participate in other programs if they had access to transportation to get them from there back home. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts or insights around closing the gap here before we close out?
Yeah, I'm going to speak up again because I'm getting so used to speaking up. But I said this in some of the chat, but I think we have a really great opportunity to serve the youth with two of these big SPLOST projects coming in 2020, the East Side Library and the Youth Center, which came from the Clark, the school district, that idea. But really sort of using that as an opportunity to work creatively together to really serve the youth. And the East Side. I think that's a wonderful opportunity where we can identify gaps and fill them in that project coming up. And that's right in the front of the SPLOST funding. So it's coming up soon.
Thank you. And there's a lot that you all have been adding to the chat, which is great. And we can capture that as well, just to have that for the record, as we are moving forward and thinking along the lines of what next steps might be. So as I prepare to close out so that I can keep us within our time frame, then just thinking along the lines of next steps, then we need to understand a lot of what I've heard is that maybe we need to consider how we are consolidating our opportunities across organizations, but then also thinking along the lines of needs assessment. So do we need to gather more information so that we can have a clear understanding of what the needs are coming directly from those who we are seeking to serve? But then looking at other programs that maybe were not a part of this presentation this evening, but we know it's being offered. And so how can we get a full list of opportunities that are out there and what's offered by the various organizations and agencies. But then I would also encourage that we continue the work around making sure that as we are looking at all of the information we received today, things that you all may already know, that we're really digging into that root cause analysis to understand why around so much of what we've received or the gaps that we've identified. Why do these gaps exist? So that we then know that we are addressing the problem. And so that's getting back to really identifying the needs assessment to ensure that we are addressing the appropriate problem. So then we're moving into actually developing a plan. And that would be a plan of action around how to build out programming that would support the needs of our community and provide opportunities for the youth of our community. So as we think about that and as we close out, then I just want to thank you all for your time and for your input, for the discussion, whether it be what you shared verbally or things that you shared in the chat. I think that this was a great start to really building out and understanding where we would need to go in collaboration with one another. And with that in mind, then I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Harris to close us out for this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. Applause to you as well. So as Dr. Scott said, we have taken this time, and I know that was a lot of information, but and I meant to put it in the chat, but I appreciate everyone's engagement. I think as Mr. Davis and Mayor Gertz and I, and Mr. Williams and Dr. Thomas were planning out this time of the year, youth engagement is a very important topic, as you all can see, and just seeing the passion that everybody brought to the conversation was just very energizing. So I know, sometimes it's like, well, now let's jump to the solution. Let's fix it tonight. But what we wanted to do is really start to address the gaps that exist before we jump into just plugging in solutions that we may feel would fix the problem without truly understanding the problem. But the work doesn't stop now. As all of you all know, many people on this call being elected officials and employees of agencies that are working to make sure all of our families and youth are taken care of in the community. So, I would encourage everyone to continue the conversation moving forward. I know most of us have each other's emails and phone numbers, so we don't have to stop today. It's fine to start brainstorming and thinking about the data that was shared today, My grandma's one of those people who always said it's great to sleep on it. So, walk away and think about, you heard 4 fantastic presentations. I see in the chat, many people saying we need to also understand the landscape of our nonprofits. We have a lot of nonprofit agencies in town working with our kids every day. I'm out there on the weekends, sometimes helping them out at our different centers and parks and at their spaces. So, I encourage everyone on call, of course, to be out in the community, but think about how do we involve those voices at the table. So I know, Mr. Davis, you are the chair for the Government Relations Committee, and this is one of the initiatives out of that committee. I don't know if you wanted to have any closing thoughts before we finish for the night, or Dr. Thomas or Mayor Gertz before we end, or any other.
I'm fine. Thank you, though.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thanks, everybody, for the really wealth of great thoughts tonight. Looking forward to the next one.
Yes, and I echo that. It was a very productive night. We thank you, Dr. Scott, for helping to facilitate and kind of bringing everything together for us. And thank you to all of our participants. And I think the big thing for me is ensuring that we don't drop this. So I'm sure that Mr. Davis and Mr. Harris or I will reach out to Mayor Gertz and County Manager Blaine and seeing kind of where do we go next so that we can really keep this energy going for next steps.
Thank you. Well, I hope everybody has a great night. Get some sleep. The day starts again tomorrow.
And we finished on time. So thank you, Mr. Harris. Well done.
You're welcome.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, y'all.